Good evening, everyone. It's Tuesday, February 13th at 7:30 p.m. and this is a special meeting of the Board of Finance. We moved from in-person to hybrid to now remote, and as such, we turned our regular meeting into a special meeting here. So the agenda, you all have been updated just to exclude anything related to new business. So with that, what I will do is sort of kick things off here as we normally do with public comment. Okay, I don't think we have any now. Jen, did you receive emails from anyone?
No.
Okay. Well, then I think what we're going to do is we'll move right away to the first item, which is a transfer. And it's going to be a review of all the fiscal year 2024 administrative transfers.
So we usually do this in January, so I'm a little bit late on it, but year to date, we don't have that much. The summary that I gave you, for one, it's a little different layout than in the past because I'm trying to be able to just pull it from the system without entering it in the system and then also tracking in Excel. So if this works for you, we'll keep going this way. But to date, we've had 15 administrative transfers approved. They total $77,730. But I do want to point out the very first one, which was $61,421, and that was related to discussion during the budget where we approved a new CAD system for the PD and approved through the budget process, talked about moving unspent capital project money to the CAD system budget. So we did that administratively just to clean up that last piece of the budget. So without that, we had 14 transfers totaling just over $16,000, which is pretty consistent with what we have had this time in prior years.
Jen, did any transfers come up that were either above the threshold and that you thought might cause us to kind of revisit any of our policy here?
No, I don't think so. The $5,000 policy seems to work well. The fact that we can transfer like to like within a department without a dollar threshold is really helpful for things like police and park and rec and moving between either salary to salary or overtime to overtime. That's where we would have the bigger transfers. So I think that the dollar threshold of 5,000 still works well.
Great. Okay. Any of my other colleagues, any questions on this? Okay. Well, Jen, just confirming we don't need to take any action on these because these have already been made, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, we'll move to item 2 here, which is to discuss and take action on a request for a transfer of $16,000 to the Parks and Rec seasonal and temporary account.
So we do have Jim Coughlin here. Jim, if you want, you can unmute yourself and just give a brief overview of the request.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good. So I'm here tonight to request a transfer of $16,000 to our seasonal and temporary account, which is our office account. We have a couple things going on in our office right now. Number one, our office administrator is going to be on extended leave for about 10 to 12 weeks, starting probably the mid to end of March through May. So that's one of our full-time folks in our office, and our other one of our other full-time folks in our office is our director, which we don't have right now. So we won't have half of our staff possibly from the middle of March for a little while. So we need to bring somebody in. So the majority of that transfer that we're asking for is to fund for that temporary position, which would help with permitting, some beach permits, room reservations, things like that at the town hall. The other position that we need to fund is a position that we have every year, which is a temporary, or not temporary, I'm sorry, a seasonal office person who their main responsibility is selling beach stickers. So April, May, June, July are busiest months for selling beach stickers. So that's just to fund that position. So we're taking those funds from two sources. One, our existing full-time salary. Like I said, we're out without a director, so that salary is not being paid right now to anybody. And the other item is the other fund is our seasonal maintenance account, where we typically have somebody on staff in the later part of the summer, early fall, which we didn't have last year. So we have some extra funds in that account, and that will cover that transfer.
So it's going from a maintenance to an office seasonal temp account?
Yeah, so it's going to an office seasonal temp account, taking it from two different accounts. One is our full-time salary, and the other one is a temporary or seasonal, sorry, maintenance account.
Folks, any questions here? No. Okay, Jen, anything else to add?
Nope, Jim covered it all.
Okay, thanks, Jen.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I'll accept the motion to transfer $16,000 as discussed on the in the memo to the Parks and Rec seasonal temporary account.
So moved.
Rob moves. Paul seconds. All those in favor? Looks like that's unanimous. Okay. Jim, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay, the next item is to discuss and take action on a request for funding for the preparation of permits and cost estimates for the dredging of the Darien Harbor Channel.
So this is a request from the Advisory Commission on Coastal Waters for $26,500. We have quite a bit of backup material. They are seeking to hire a consultant to go through the permitting process and to do sediment testing in preparation for dredging the harbor channel. I recall it hasn't been dredged since maybe I lost the date that it was last dredged, but they do on a triannual basis, they do surveys to determine the navigability, and they have seen an increase in how much sediment is building up. So the 26,000 would allow them to obtain the permits, which right now is about a 2-year process, and it would allow them to test the sediment. It does not cover the cost of dredging, which at this time is estimated to be about $350,000. Doing the permitting and the sediment testing does not commit us to doing the dredging.
So Jen, why are we taking this out of the general fund and not out of the like our contingency, for example?
It is entirely up to you. So it can come out of your capital contingency if you want. But as there was no time constraint on it, I wanted to send it through as a special appropriation. And then if you want to change it and not require it to go to the RTM, you can do that.
Are there any sort of time requirements around this that would suggest it should be done sooner rather than later?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And just to be clear, this is definitely considered a capital expense, not an operating expense, given that it's permitting and so forth.
It would lead to a capital project. Permitting is a common portion of a capital project, but what we refer to as the capital fund is really a capital and non-recurring fund. So this also would fall under the non-recurring nature of that fund.
Hey, John, questions?
Jim, just one question. A question came up during a recent FMB meeting as to, in fact, who should bear the cost of this work. And obviously, the voters benefit the most from this. Is this really a town expense, or is this something that should be funded at least in part by those people who benefit from it?
So at the Board of Selectmen meeting, they did discuss when it comes time to do the dredging, pursuing at least some kind of a cost share arrangement with the boat clubs, because they are the primary beneficiary. This is really for navigability and boat access. There's not really an environmental or town-wide component to it. So the town would open up conversations with the boat clubs.
There is a police boat that accesses that channel.
Yes.
And is docked at the boat club. So there is some public use, but the point is well made.
And Dan, I think on top of the police boat, obviously the where we launch boats is back in there, and they have to traverse out through this channel as well.
Well, this is a different project than that. This is from the boat club out to the sound.
Understood, but to get out when somebody launches a boat from the boat ramp.
Well, you're right. They have to come up through there. So it's not just Norotan Yacht Club and Darien Boat Club members that access this channel. It's anyone that uses a boat, including the police and the public.
Which raises the question of, was any consideration given to extending the study to include the portion beside and behind the boat club? Because if you look at that chart, mean low tide on that chart is 3 feet and change when you get back into that area, and that's nearly unnavigable for many boats.
I don't know if they've addressed that or not. The request that we have is just for the area that's on the map that they provided.
My understanding is that that portion of the river was covered under Pear Tree Point related activity. So there was already some activity with respect to dredging that area, what you're referring to, David. This is from the boat, basically from the boat club to the sound, but so, the area from the lawn.
I got it. So yeah, so that area will be that area will be lumped in with the redo of the boat ramp as part of the Pear Tree project, potentially.
Yeah. I believe that's accurate.
Okay.
And Jen, regarding timing, is there a need for us to approve this out of our capital contingency versus sending it to the RTM or Jack? Do you have any
Not that I'm aware of, because we can make the next RTM meeting.
Okay.
It's a 2-year permitting process. So I don't think waiting a month is going to make a difference in that.
Yeah, if I might add, the agenda for February meeting was just set last night, but personally, I'll go with whatever direction the Board of Finance wishes to take.
Can I ask a dumb question? Is what's dredged out of the channel being removed or dumped somewhere else?
It's what I remember hearing at the Board of Selectmen meeting is that it's dumped into the sound, but only once it's determined as to what that soil contains. So depending on what kind of contaminants in there, there are different rules with respect to disposing of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you're reading through the memo, there are 2 separate locations where they are allowed to dump, but that's only after they go through the process of taking core samples, having them evaluated by a lab, determining what contaminants there are not and what levels. You either get a pass or a fail. If you get a fail, then it raises all kinds of other problems in terms of having to take other sampling and stuff like that. But the disposal cost will be part of the broader dredging project later on, assuming that the core samples they take as part of the permitting process achieve the pass status.
And Jen, just to fill in a blank from earlier, this memo refers to the dredging was last done in 2001.
Thank you.
And am I right in looking at this? There's one attachment that talks about the surveys that were done looks like every 3 years, 2012, 15, 18, and then it skipped a bit to 23 and the volume like more than doubled. Have we thought about changing the cadence on this? Is it just random or?
Well, they usually do every 3 years. That one that's a 5-year span, it was delayed 2 years because of COVID. And somewhere in the memo, they did say that they're not entirely sure why that rate is increasing. It could be due to storms or some flow changes. But I don't know if they're looking at changing from a every 3-year survey or not.
Yeah, when it comes down to approving the actual project, I'm going to need someone to explain to me the dredging process, and if they take an 8-foot channel out of the middle, how they keep the adjacent soil or adjacent bottom, which is significantly shallower than that, simply from eroding into the channel they just dredged.
Well, there will definitely be
there
someone
are,
to explain that when we come back in 2 years.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess one thing in reading through the memo, it did seem like as part of this permitting, they will do samples. So we'll know before we begin, whether it's the low cost version where you can dump it out in the sound, or whether it's the higher cost version where you need to deal with the sediment some other way.
My reading of the memo was if you fail the initial environmental test, you got to go through a whole nother permitting process. You basically fail the application for the permit. You got to start over.
So, okay. Well, guess as it's set up here, and I guess as I would accept the motion, is we would just send this to the RTM to be funded from the general fund. Does anyone have any desires to fund it a different way? I think it'd be good for the RTM to kind of talk in public to hear more broadly about it.
I think I just wonder if we're going to vote on approval for the permitting fees. When are we going to talk about cost sharing, if there is any to be had?
That would be initiated by the town. I think first we have to do the sediment testing and know what kind of cost we might be talking about. And also we have estimated 2 years before we even have the permit. So I think we don't want to start that conversation too early when then leadership at the boat clubs may change or something like that. I think,
okay,
we want to be a little closer to when we receive the permits.
I guess, should there be any cost sharing on the permitting fees?
There's not proposed to be, no.
and to be clear, this is a public waterway. It may be used by private clubs principally, but it's a public waterway that we have jurisdiction over as a town. So I think we need to keep that in mind as we think about requiring cost sharing. But I think that's a discussion for a later date.
Got it. And I think with respect to cost sharing, Taylor, there's certainly examples of other things we've done recently in terms of flood studying and so forth, where certain property owners and so forth have shared in that cost. So we'll encourage the Board of Selectmen to, as we learn more about it, to have those conversations. So, okay, I will accept a motion to approve $26,500 from our fund balance to be appropriated for the permitting and initial work on the dredging of Darien Harbor.
So moved.
Paul moves. Rob seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, it's unanimous. Okay, the next one is our annual setting of the interest rate for tax deferrals.
Yep, we're required to do this annually, and it is laid out in the Code of Ordinances that we have two plans. One that is 0.5% above the December investment earnings for STIF, and the other plan is 1% above that STIF rate. The December earnings rate for STIP was 5.44%. So the first plan would have a tax deferral interest rate of 5.94, and the second plan would be 6.44.
And Jen, what determines if a particular property or owner is put into which plan?
I believe it's income, but I'm not certain.
Yeah, I believe that's true, Jen.
Is there any limit to how long someone can be in these plans?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with the tax deferral. I can get that information from the assessor's office for you.
And is the interest, does the interest roll into the deferred amount, or is the interest cash pay?
That I don't know how the deferral program works, but I can absolutely get that from the assessor. I can ask them to put together a summary for you.
Yeah, David, I believe it's all capitalized from prior years.
That's what I would think, but
Dave, you could find it on the town's website. It describes the various provisions.
And I think the takeaway here is that either under either plan A or plan B, the deferral is 50 to 100 basis points above what we would otherwise be able to earn on that money. And obviously with STIF at 5.44, and rates going down, I certainly think remains an advantageous rate for the town. Any other questions on the setting the tax deferral rate? Okay. So I'll accept a motion to approve the interest rate for tax deferrals for Plan A and Plan B as outlined in the memo. John moves. Rob seconds. All those in favor? Unanimous. Okay, items 5 and 6. We have two upcoming organized labor union contract negotiations that are going to start to take place. The first, which we'll talk about, is the Town Hall Employees Union. And coming up in item 6 will be the one for the new dispatchers bargaining unit. And Jen, I know these are two different items, but the history here, were the dispatchers originally part of the Town Hall Union?
They were, and they have filed to be carved out of that union and create their own union, and we will be negotiating with them as a new bargaining unit.
And that split, if you will, taking place with the negotiation of the new contract, right?
Yes.
and Jen, how does that work? If they file, we have to let them carve out?
I think we can object, but we don't see a reason to. It does make sense to carve them out because there are significant differences that actually make it very difficult to negotiate a contract with two very different employee groups in one bargaining unit.
And Jen, just maybe as a reminder here, the Town Hall Union, we had moved, I think either 3 or 6 years ago, new employees joined a defined contribution plan.
Yes.
As opposed to a defined benefit plan.
Yep. And that actually started with the dispatchers. They were the first ones to move into the DC.
Well, they were the first new employees as part of the Town Hall
Yes.
plan? Yeah, got it. Okay. Well, is there anyone that would want to work on these two contracts, which I think will move, Jen, simultaneously?
We had our first meeting with the Town Hall bargaining unit this past week just to start establishing ground rules. So that's going to move fairly quickly. We have the next meeting, I believe, is the beginning of March. We have not yet started with the dispatchers. We do expect that that's going to take more time. But the current contract that both groups are operating under expires on June 30th. So we are trying to get the Town Hall one done by June 30th, but we don't anticipate that the dispatchers will be done that quickly.
Well, Jenny, in your opinion, do you think it's best that we have one person do both since they're splitting from one common contractor? Do you think, given the timing of the meetings and so forth, it's better to have two different reps?
I think you could go either way. I don't think there's necessarily a huge benefit to having the same one. So if scheduling is difficult to have one person attending meetings for two bargaining units, there'd be no problem to have two different representatives.
Got it. Okay. Well, I guess, the first item is the town hall employees. How many members are in this union?
There were about 30, 35, and about 9 of those are dispatchers. So the numbers will be about 25 and 9, 24 and 9.
Well, is there anyone that has interest in working on the town hall employees union? I think I did this 3 years ago, so.
I probably have the time.
Okay. And John, I think you just completed another recent one, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So since Jen participated in that as well, she ought to indicate that she has no objections.
Okay. Does anyone
We
else?
enjoyed having John on the team.
Okay. Well, I will tell you what, I nominate John to be our representative on that contract negotiation. Is there a second? Okay, Dan seconds. All in favor? Okay.
Thanks, John.
Unanimous. Okay, so the next item is to deal with the dispatchers, and you said there's currently 9, but I think we had approvals for. Did we have approvals for up to 11 at one point?
No, we have approvals for 9. I think right now we have 8 filled positions. But it would be a 9 position bargaining unit.
Okay. Is there someone that has interest in doing this?
I'll do it, Jim.
Okay, Rob, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I will tell you what, I would nominate Rob for representing us on the newly to be formed dispatchers union contract. Is there a second? Okay, David seconds. All those in favor? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you, John. Thank you, Rob. And thank you, Jen. Okay. The next item here is something I added to our agenda at the last, when we switched it to a special meeting, just to make sure if anyone had any questions or anything related to the fiscal 2025 budget that we could discuss it. Maybe just to give everybody a quick reminder of kind of where we are in the process. The Board of Selectmen approved their budget about a week ago. I think when you look at the operating side of that budget, Jen sent around a spreadsheet on, I think at the end of last week, which you all should have. I think Jen, you sent that around the 11th, right? Or 10th?
I think it only went out to you and to Jill, but I can send it out to everybody.
We didn't get them.
Well, I'm sure you all saw this as part of their discussions, but if you look at the operating side, basically including the town operations and the library, which we roll into that, the proposed increase is up 8%. If you look at the revenue side of it, and I would just remind everybody that when we're approving the Selectmen budget, a little bit different than the Board of Ed budget, we're actually approving, for the most part, a gross expense budget. And then we separately sort of assign or assume revenues are coming in to offset that. When you look at the revenues, I will say that are, directionally correlated to the operations of the town. Those revenues, as currently laid out recommended by the Board of Selectmen, are up by about 12.25%, which brings the net Board of Selectmen operations up about 6%. So that's where we stand on that budget. That budget formally gets presented to us on the at our next meeting 2 weeks from today on March 5th. I know John and I assume Kate will probably be there and give us, a bit of a brief run through on that. On the other side of the house, the Board of the Board of Education was supposed to meet tonight and approve their budget. Because school was canceled and they needed to have that meeting in person. It's a fairly lengthy meeting. When they do that, they've pushed it out to Thursday night. I'll remind everyone that the superintendent's proposed budget was up about 6.2% versus last year on the operating side. There's been a couple small tweaks related to a recently settled union contract and a few other small things that have kind of pushed it down a tad closer to around 6.1. But I would say the 9 members of the Board of Ed have all discussed and put forward a number of adds and cuts to be discussed as part of their approval process on Thursday night. So it's I would say it's kind of hard to predict where exactly that budget's going to end up when they approve it on Thursday.
Jim, you didn't talk about the Board of Select capital budget, but the only observation I'd make is that their approved budget assumed approximately $700,000 in capital spending being reallocated to be funded out of ARPA. And I would hope that the ARPA committee would have an opportunity. It has not yet had an opportunity, but I would hope that the ARPA committee would have an opportunity to opine on those recommendations before we end up having to determine whether we as an independent board will accept those modifications to the ARPA funding proposals. I made a point that in a communication that everything that's on the ARPA list is there for a reason. If there's a good reason to remove it and replace it with one of the proposed town capital projects, then that's a conversation we can have and support. But again, to my knowledge, that conversation has not yet occurred. So I'm hoping that the ARPA committee will have an opportunity to insert itself here.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, I think that it's a good point to remind everybody, and Jen will correct me if I'm wrong, but the town has to identify, if we will, lock in what we're choosing to spend the money on.
We have to do more than that. We have to have contracts and purchases on order by the end of 2024.
2024. And then we have to actually fully expend those dollars on those items that we locked in by the end of 2026.
Correct. And that may be a very good reason to take something off the list, because we don't have the requisite level of confidence that those two things will occur. But again, that's why we need the conversation.
And listen, I think to Paul's good email that he sent me, at the end of last week, I think as we begin to think about funding capital, right, we're going to have, our general fund. I think what we all describe as our reserve, sort of what we ended the year with last year was in excess of $30 million, effectively an all-time high, above our, above the minimum that our committee has set from a policy perspective, and above the 15% that we generally look at when we're looking at the rating agency methodology. I think we're going to need to think about how much we want to, if any, use from our general fund. And Jen, maybe if you want to chime in here a little bit about some of the recent changes to the way that the statutes and even the rating agencies look at how much we keep in there.
There hasn't been any statutory changes, but there's always been a focus on fund balance by the ratings agencies. It's one component of what they look at, and what they really want to see are trends. So if they see a multi-year trend of us drawing down our fund balance and a reduction in fund balance, that does raise some flags for them. If it were a one-time thing and we say, listen, you've seen increases over time and there's a specific reason why we're drawing it down, that's explainable to them. But it is a component of what they look at when we get rated.
Yeah. And I think historically, we've never used fund balance to fund the operating part of a budget. We've only ever used it to fund capital
Correct.
items of our budget. So as we begin to think about sources, we need to think about what, if any, we should be using from ARPA to make sure that those things are identified, contracted, encumbered, if you will, by the end of 24 and then spent by 26. We should be thinking about, and there are some items which which can be bonded here. We should be thinking about what we want to buy, what we want to spend from the general fund, or what we want to spend from, our own capital reserve as we begin to think about this. Because, obviously Board of Ed has capital as well, although, generally lower than we've seen in past years.
And Jen, can I just, for my education, in looking at the ARPA sheet as part of the financial disclosure package, I'm seeing $1.9 million in unobligated funds currently. So that's the, if nothing else changes in terms of any of the projects that are currently on the list being removed, we need to commit and contract $1.9 million before the end of this calendar year.
Correct.
Jim, if I might add, Dan, to answer your question, I know that John does intend to bring it back to the Upper Advisory Committee, as well as looking at some of the other items. But one of the risks that I've stated and John and Kate have also stated, if we put down $50,000 as committed, but we only spend $48,000 from that December 31st number, that's $2,000 that has to go back to the federal government. It can't be reallocated once we've gone there. So part of the concept that I think they were looking at, and one that I also support, which we'll talk about at the ARPA, is, whatever we can spend now, and if we have something that's sitting in ARPA currently, we can always move that back into our capital request or other requests. And I think, and Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's part of the philosophy of how they were looking at some of these items.
That can absolutely be done. Kate right now has put out to all of the departments a request for a status update on all of their projects. And I think once she receives all of that, that'll be the information that can then be brought to the ARPA committee to talk about where things stand. Are they going to be committed in time, or should we maybe swap things around a little bit?
There's also some RFPs that for projects that have been approved that haven't been done yet. So that's why they do not have their final number, the 1.8 million.
I think the one thing I would make sure we're doing as relates to any ARPA project is, just because we're using ARPA dollars, I think we should make sure that any of those projects go through the same type of scrutiny that any other capital project was. Just because we're funding it technically with aid dollars from the federal government, I don't think it should, we should still give it the same type of rigor that we do with projects we fund from our taxes or from the general fund.
Great.
So, the things we're going to need to think about here, obviously, are the setting the tax collection rate and so forth. All of these are things that have played into, our perpetually increasing fund balance and kind of how much of that we want to allocate back into funding capital expenses. What I will say, what is different a little bit this year, starting with the Board of Ed, as of, I'm not sure if January is out yet, but as of Rich's last update, there was approximately a $400,000 projected operating deficit in the Board of Ed budget. So whereas, at this same time last year and the year before, we were looking at either gross or net surpluses coming back from them in the context of $500,000 to $1 million. Here we're looking at a $400,000 projected deficit. Now, mind you, that's just projected. They've got 6 months left to go. A lot can happen. We can have a lot of snow days, a lot of non-snow days, but we should watch carefully in terms of what happens there. But I don't think we're going to be counting on we should count on the same amount of surpluses coming back into our the general fund.
With respect to that, we should get the first excess cost reimbursement in the vicinity of February 20th to 24th. And that is normally 75% of the whole year's contribution. The remaining 25% is in May, so we can kind of do a pro forma from there on out.
It's a good point, Paul. When Jill and Dr. Adley and Rich come and present it to us on the 5th, I'll make sure they give us an update in terms of where their last submissions and so forth were, because that'll be post their approval of the budget, right?
Yeah, and plus they have to submit a revision to their December 1st submission on March 1st, indicating any changes in existing students and any new students to the district.
If you look at Rich's report from December, there was a couple of adjustments on post the December 1st that's listed in his fiscal report for, I believe, a student moving out of district. So they are watching that, but they are anticipating, I would think, having less than what they originally thought they were going to be getting from ECU.
I think other things on the Board of Ed budget, just make everyone aware of one of the things that in connection with them renegotiating a 5-year transportation agreement with First Student, who provides most of our busing services. They have begun to look at whether or not there can be cost savings by the district, or by the town, I should say, acquiring some of the smaller buses that are used for special education transportation and so forth. And they've done some initial work there. It looks like from a net basis, it would be break even for this year, but it could provide savings in future years. They're going to be discussing that more on Thursday night. Directionally, on a full year equivalent basis, they were looking at saving $600,000 to $700,000. But that similar amount of that's what the buses would cost to purchase in the first year. So net, we'd be looking at a break even for fiscal 25, but some possible savings thereafter. If you watch the meetings, I know some discussions that have to take place with planning and zoning to make sure that they have the ability to park some of these buses in some of the larger parking lots of some of our elementary schools and so forth. So I think that's it's something that's come up relatively recently in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and we should all make sure we listen to their discussion on Thursday. And I'm sure that's something they'll be updating us more about as they come in front of us in 2 weeks. Anyone else, anything to add regarding things that we've heard or seen over the last month in terms of watching the budgets?
Jim,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Paul. I'm sorry, John.
Did they not also discuss that they were going to get serious about looking at healthcare and trying to look at it top to bottom to see whether in fact there are cost savings opportunities if in fact they don't just continue to renew it and suffer the consequences of the current structure?
I know in terms of the healthcare, I know we had a meeting last year and there was a fairly deep analysis done around things like partial self-insurance, where the town or the school could take some, sort of greater first loss risk piece inside of that program.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of looking at the close to 1,000 employees on the Board of Ed side, I think it was determined that based on the population at that time and certain aspects of the employee group, it would be more expensive for us to be able to self-insure that first loss versus the overall cost that we got from that the school was able to negotiate as part of a greater consortium that we negotiate with in Lower Fairfield. But it's one of the things that I've asked Rich and Jill and Dr. Adley to give us an update on when they come and discuss it.
Okay, good.
Jim, just from a budget review, when do you want the teams of people to start to work on analyzing the budget. I know you're not getting it until I believe the 5th, but if nothing else, getting the groups to start to discuss various sections of the budget. So what's your thought process timing on
Yeah.
that?
I think that should basically, those conversations and any kind of thoughts that you all have, that should basically begin now. The Board of Selectmen budget has effectively been set, and the Board of Ed will be set in 48 hours from now, or maybe a few more than 48 hours, I guess.
Okay.
But definitely, we will we'll circulate the list of where we sort of match up and make sure we start that reach out. And I think, Jack, let's make sure, like, this year, any comments that you guys have or views, let's make sure, like, we all sort of discuss those ahead of us voting on the budget, so that we can make our decision with certainly all of the comments and direction that you guys are seeing.
Agreed. If anybody needs the list and everything, just email me and I'll send out the list. There were 2 other people added to Public Works from that committee. So, I'm meeting Thursday, and we're going to go through, because we have 3 new people on the committee, just to go through the basis and start the then.
Okay. Any other questions on the budget? I mean, yes, this is I guess I'll use the word unprecedented. If you look at the proposed increases, right, for both the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen right now, they're certainly higher than we have seen in a long time. I think there are a lot of things that are different about this budget when you look at some of the recent contracts and other sort of either increase in FTE or special education or other things that are sort of taking place within some of these contracts. I think it's extremely important that we all sort of dive deep in these, so that we really know what's driving these. And if we're going to begin to look for efficiencies, or we want feedback from either the operating boards on why they didn't make certain decisions and so forth, let's make sure we sort of percolate those to the top and get those questions back to each of those boards as soon as possible. Then, Jen, maybe just to finish off the budget discussion here, because debt service is playing an increasing role in our overall budget. Update on our proposed timing of our next bonding and getting ready for that.
Yeah, so you guys have covered half of what I was going to talk about with the financial report between ARPA and now bonding update. So the financial report will be a lot faster. We are planning to come to you at your March 12th regular meeting. Mark Chapman and I will be there to get your approval for sizing, structure, and a resolution to sell, so that we can go to the market in early April. Right now, we're targeting April 9th as our sale date, which is also, I believe, the date that you vote on the budget. And so it'll be like last year. If it all comes together nicely, we'll have the exact debt service numbers. If we don't have the exact numbers when you vote, we'll at least have a very good estimate based on the size and the structure that you select in March.
Okay. And Jen, that'll certainly play into our overall budgeting in terms of how much we do in bands, how much we do in, which don't all pay interest at the end, versus how much we do in bonds, which pay semi-annual interest. So I think what I'll probably do is, we typically do that a little bit late in the cycle in terms of our review. Maybe I'll make sure we discuss that earlier on in the budget, so that we're prepared for the conversation with you and Mark and are ready to go to market.
Right. What's in the budget right now is a very rough estimate developed in early October. So there is something in there about, and there's an assumption about what we would do in April, but it's probably it's going to be different. But it did assume some combination of bonds and notes.
Got it. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions on the budget, we'll move to maybe now a shortened financial report.
All right. On the
If you
financial
want-
report
you wanna
on
flip
page
it up on
1,
the
there
screen?
is a correction. Investment income, I forgot to update the note. So the 2.7 million that you see, that is $1 million better than budget, is actually through January, not through November.
Hey, Jen, can you just, I think, so we're all going through it with the Zoom here, can you flip that up on the screen? Does it make, or-
Yeah, hang on. All right, do you see it now on your screen?
Yes.
All right. So investment income is actually through December, but it's doing very well. And on town clerk revenues, we've collected almost 1.25 million through January. And that includes the large sale that occurred, I think, in December, of that other parcel abutting Great Island. And building permits, which is the other big one that we watch, we're close to $1 million now. Unfortunately, because they're working with temporary help in the office right now, I don't have a number from them on how much of that revenue is due to the redevelopment permits. But we did budget 400,000 for that. On the expenditure side, everything is tracking as expected. There's nothing really
Jen?
unusual going on.
Jen, would you just explain to me why on the debt service component we're at 63% versus the historical average at 85?
Because our debt service payment profile changes, we've tried to switch more to the second half of the year. So as some stuff has rolled off or declined, because we used to do level principal, not level debt. So we actually had declining debt service on our older issues, which tended to have principal due at the beginning of the year. And we've tried to push more to the second half of the year just because of tax collection. So because we're looking 5 years back, that's still a little bit skewed. But this is just based on the debt service schedules that we have in place for the existing debt.
And the 49 million of bands, those would all fall into the second half too, right?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
But Jen, we're not including, in terms of our budgeted debt service, we're not including the principal or interest on those bands, are we?
Well, we have in fiscal 24.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have an interest payment due, but on the revenue side, we had set aside about $930,000 of the band premium to offset a good portion of the debt service on the bands. But there is an interest payment due when they mature.
But we're not including the principal component?
There is no principal component. It's interest only because it's just a 1-year note.
The bonds are due in full 1 year hence unless they're refinanced. And since there's been no decision made on what percentage is going to be refinanced, the entire amount should be included as debt service in the current year.
No, because we will do something with them.
You will do something with them, but we haven't determined how much is going to be refinanced.
Well,
and how
if you'd
much is
like,
not going to be
I can put
refinanced.
49 million there, but we're not going to be paying $49 million of
Yeah.
principal on them.
Yeah, Dave, the assumption in the budget was that we would either roll it into another band effectively for 1 year or roll it into bonds for effectively 20 to 30 years. So
Or if we had unspent band proceeds for, say, HHR for whatever reason didn't move forward and we had 20 million unspent, we would bond what had been spent and we would repay with the 20 million that we didn't spend.
So David, like there's an implied refinancing in there in the budget.
Correct. All other expenditures are tracking.
So if the Board of Finance decides that we're only going to issue 25 million in bands, the difference between the 49 and the 25 is a maturity or a bonding?
It would either be another
Yes.
band issued for 1 year, or it'll be a bond issued for 30 years. The alternative would have been, like, let's just say that we really wanted to budget for repaying half of Great Island in 1 year, we would have had a tax for an extra $45 million.
Okay.
The rest of the expenditures are tracking as expected. There's really nothing unusual on any of those. On page 4 for state revenues, we are expecting approximately $75,000 additional in our educational cost share for the prior year ECR adjustment. This happens from time to time. The last few years, the adjustment has been to our favor, but there are times that we will see a reduction in ECS when they true up the prior year ECR. And then Jack and I were talking about the MRSA sales tax sharing before the meeting started. So the last couple of years, we have received some money, but it's really not a guarantee. So we did receive over $200,000 this year. In the fiscal 25 budget, we have assumed $75,000. We wanted to have something in there, but we shouldn't count on this same level of receipts in the future, but we should budget something. On our contingency accounts, your capital reserve contingency is currently just under $400,000. And our salary increase contingency, you'll see a transfer in March to move out for the Public Works contract settlement that just happened. We didn't make the February cycle of meetings, but we have their new salaries in. We know what we need to transfer from contingency. And then at the bottom, our audited fund balance, unassigned fund balance is $30.8 million, which is 18.63% of the current year adopted budget, which is just under $11 million in excess of the fund balance 12% minimum. Our other funds are all doing very well just because of timing. The year-to-date sewer service charges are just through December. Everything was still January was still being closed out when I had to prepare this, but overall the sewer service fund is looking very good. We will see an increase and they will be over budget on the sewer treatment equipment. We receive a annual bill in November, which Ed then reconciles. And based on what our required share is of their expenses, he's going to have to start contributing some more to them for the rest of the year. Parking fund is looking very good. Parking tickets are ticking back up. In January, we collected just over $10,000 and our pre-pandemic monthly average was about $11,000. So we are ticketing now that we have 2 parking rangers working and we are seeing more activity in the train station lots. And daily parking is ticking up a little bit as well. Our current average monthly is about 40,000 and pre-pandemic it was 48. Recreation Program Fund, they'll be doing their next round of registrations very soon. So we'll see the revenue go up and then we'll see program expenses following. And then the Great Island Management Fund, these are where we collect our lease revenue, which will be decreasing, and where we expense for our repair and maintenance of the properties.
Hey, Jen. This rent includes rent from the stables, which we understand are not renewing their lease.
Yes.
How much rent will we lose as a result of that?
I think what the Board of Selectmen in their budget, they included a transfer from the general fund to the Great Island Fund in the amount of $225,000. The vast majority of that was the stables. I think the stable calculation came out to 205 or 210.
Okay. Thank you.
On the active bonded projects, they're all kind of laid out there for you. The only thing I was going to talk about on here was the timing of the upcoming bond sale, but we've already covered that.
You know, we haven't had an Oxbridge Building Committee meeting in a bit. Do you know when we're going to be able to close that out? I know it's all punch list stuff and there's a lot of punch lists and it seems to go on and on and on. But do you have any guidance from Kip as to when we'll be able to basically wrap this up?
I do not, because even after the expenditures stop, there's gonna be some lengthy lag for the state to close it out and for us
Okay.
to have a final state reimbursement amount. So I'm not sure.
Thank you.
We do have added on here the Norotan Fire Department engine, as well as the additional appropriations for the Hanson Road Bridge, the HHR projects, and the sewer infrastructure improvements. Those were all approved by the RTM.
Jen, can we talk about the Henley and the Henley roof and the Holmes roof projects?
Yep.
Do we have any update on when those will close out? And will you just educate me on how to read this chart in terms of how much money would be expected back from those and where that money would go?
So the money expected back is what's shown as the state grant amount. So on Holmes Roof and Skylight, we're expecting $70,000. That's the Board of Ed's estimate. We've been carrying that number for a while. And on the Henley roof replacement, we're expecting $29,000. Whatever state grant money is received would come into each of those projects as a revenue. So if for some reason we get less than $70,000 on the Holmes Roof and Skylight, we will need to transfer from somewhere else to make up the difference. A couple of months ago, I checked with the Board of Ed, and they really have no idea when the state is actually going to do the reimbursements on these.
Okay, and we also have the DHS track, which is now complete, my understanding.
Mhm.
So when will we close that out? And
Well, we have not, let me find it. We have not done any funding on it yet. As you can see, bond proceeds is zero life to date. So that would be something that, based on our structure, we will either bond, or if it falls into the note category, we would take notes. And so this will continue to show up on this report until we have raised enough funds to cover the $815,000 of expense. Next, page 14 is Great Island. There's only been about $30,000, $31,000 of activity since last month. Not much being expended on that at the moment. And then on ARPA, we've already covered most of that. I was going to mention the Board of Selectmen's movement or plan to move from the budget to ARPA, the need for that to run by the ARPA committee, and then just wanted to point out what David already pointed out, that we have 1.9 million still unobligated.
And Jen, can I ask, when are we going to schedule a time to discuss the excess unused appropriation on Great Island and potential revocation of those amounts?
That I would not be in charge of, but I think what the process needs to be is this additional 6 million that Monica came to you and explained last year was going to be used for the additional purchase, for remediation, that kind of stuff. I think we need to work through those and find out what that final number is. And then we would know exactly how much we can rescind from the authorization. Because if we spend less than the 6 million, we want to rescind, you know, the full amount, because that would satisfy what was the purpose of this original appropriation.
And do we yet have estimates for cost of widening the road and whatever other improvements they intended with that additional issuance?
I would have to check with Ed on that and find out what the status is on those.
Yeah, we have estimates, but we haven't actually put it out to bid yet. And I think that is,
I thought they were starting on widening the road in April and we haven't put it out to bid.
it just received P&Z approval, I think, last Wednesday.
Hey, Jen, who has authority to rescind let me ask this. What votes are required to rescind that bond authorization overage? Is it just us?
Yes, that is all that is required.
We don't need anything from the Board of Selectmen. We can just rescind that bond authorization, the whatever amount of the bond authorization we deem to be in excess.
Yes,
And that's our call entirely.
yes.
Thank you.
So guys, on this couple things, if you look at right now, there's, 6 million additional of funds that we raised, right? Of which we've expended about a million three and change, if you will. So it's 4.7 left. We have probably upwards of 800,000 to $1 million in terms of everything related to the expanding of 23A plus what else they might need to do around the circle and so forth. So I think that there's two things. Will there be excess in the 6 million that we bonded for? And if there is excess, we can take those bonds, which were raised at a relatively attractive rate, right? And rather than, because they do have a non-call period, we can allocate those to other projects. For example, DHS track, right?
Well, let me correct you. We have not raised the full 91 million in bonds. We bonded about 43 million and 49 million was notes. So we've spent most of that, and we will need to either roll that as a note or permanently finance what we've already spent. But we have not bonded 49 million of this.
Right. I meant to say raise that much in either bonds or bands, right? So we can either use that money for other projects, right? Or we can, but there's a portion of the unspent 6 million, and then there's a portion of the unused bonding capacity, right? Bonding/bands capacity.
Well, just to be clear, I think, and not to speak for David, but I think what I'm more concerned with is not the 85 and not the 6, because we made that decision a year ago. It's over the 6. Now, clearly, if we don't need the entire 6, we ought to discuss how to adjust whatever we need to adjust. But I'm more concerned with the 91 to the 103 that we've never authorized bonding for, but we did authorize the spending. So I would like to rescind that spending authorization, at least the amount over the 91, but possibly more than that if we don't need all of the 91. Recognizing, Jim, that's a conversation because we don't necessarily want to take away spending authorization and thereby bonding ability to our detriment. So that's why it's the conversation.
Well, yeah, and Jen, I guess in terms of only needing the Board of Finance vote, is that to both repeal the appropriation and the bonding authorization, or just the bonding authorization portion of it?
I believe it's both, because let me double check with bond counsel and the way that they've written the rescissions in the past. But in my mind, if you rescind the bonding authorization, we don't have another source of funds authorized or identified, so it can't support any appropriation beyond that.
Well, yeah, let's just double check that we can both rescind an appropriation and a bonding. Because would that suggest that we could rescind any other capital appropriation? Or only if it's tied to bonding? Which Dan, I think is what you're getting at, right?
What I'm getting at is the same point we made a year ago, which is this, not to rehash it. I'm just getting at the difference between what we authorized in bonding and spending and what we actually needed in bonding and spending. And what we needed in bonding and spending was the 85, and we agreed to add the 6 and change to that. And I'm looking at the overage. So whether it's both the spending and the bonding, clearly. But if we don't need to rescind spending authorization because we've rescinded the ability to fund it, that's fine with me. But I'm happy to be instructed by Jen and bond counsel accordingly.
Okay. Well, Jen, if you could come back to us on how exactly those mechanics work when.
Yep.
And I just want to remind everybody, this is entirely consistent with what we agreed to as a Board of Finance and as a Board of Selectmen, at least to my recollection, when we met before we authorized the 6.5, or maybe after we authorized the 6.5. So we're not, this is not new. This should not be a new conversation for anybody. This is just basically executing what I think we all agreed to a year ago, and we agreed to wait until we understood exactly how much of that 6.5 or whether that 6.5 was going to be adequate. So
Jen, just to, in connection with what Dan's saying and drilling down a little bit more, in connection with finding out whether we can cancel an appropriation and a bonding resolution or whether they're tied, let's also find out from Ed when exactly we would have sort of firm bids related to 23A. Because knowing what those firm bids are could play into whether we were to refinance, whether by ban or bond, any of the unspent $6 million.
I would also ask that we just, before we bring a rescind vote to this board, we understand from the Great Island Committee what further spending they believe to be necessary as part of what has been kind of called phase 1. So that we don't rescind spending that we'll immediately need to then subsequently authorize. Without, again, it's a conversation, but let's just pull together not just that information from bond counsel, but whatever the committee believes might be about to be spent beyond 23A. And maybe, Jim, you already have the answer to that.
Yeah, I think the short answer is there's a lot of detail and estimates put on around widening 23A and some of the connection as it relates to, thinking about like parking lots and other sort of continued remediation of some of the other spots. Not as much work has been done on that, Dan. So I think, but listen, we need to figure out what the uses are and whether there are going to be near-term uses of the $6 million or the remaining portion of the $6 million. So we decide whether or not we ban or bond for it in April.
So what I'm going to do in terms of the $6 million is I'm going to go back to that list that Monica provided a year ago when we were talking about the initial uses of the $6 million. There was remediation, some site work. We've broken it down a little more detail on here, but I will work with Ed to find out what is still to be done from that original list and when he expects to have firm numbers on that. And that will let us know how much of this 6.5, I think we ended up using more in legal than we expected, but say the remaining $6 million, how much of that is expected to be spent and on what timeline. But I would just say that, and I'm completely with Dan on, I think we should know what the situation is, but I don't think we want to rescind anything until we can say the work is done, the bills are paid, we know what the exact cost was. But I think the intention was that this $6 million was only for those items that Monica stood before you a year ago and said, these are the additional things that we have to do post-sale related to access and remediation.
Right. Yep.
Listen, I think it's a good exercise as well, because we don't want to have money, we don't want to be out earning negative arbitrage on funds just sitting around if we don't expect to spend them in the coming, in the relative near term.
Jim, can I just say something? So as an example, though, the fire engine that we just approved, for bonding. About 425,000 is going to be due next January when we pay for the chassis. And in 2 years after that, when we finally get the fire engine, it's going to be, let's say, 750,000 thereabouts, or 800,000. If the Board of Finance then decides that there's available cash to pay for that instead of bonding, you could still pay and have the full appropriation, the item is settled, but then rescind the bond that you originally approved without affecting the original authorization because we've spent the money. So is that not true, Jen, that we can pay for cash after we've decided to bond and just then rescind the bond?
Well, yeah, we can choose to use cash if we decide we want to pay it out of fund balance. We would rescind the bonds or the bond authorization, but we would have to also have an action that authorizes us to utilize fund balance to support that appropriation.
Fair enough.
But Jack, to your point, when you think about the unspent funds that we have from proceeds right now, it's
Yep.
all ban funds, so they're coming due in 2 months.
No, I understood, but I'm looking out further on that particular case because obviously we're going to pay 425,000 out of the general fund unless you choose next year to roll that 425 into any of the other bonding that you're doing.
Got it. No, understood. Good point.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
That is all that I had on the financial report.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on the financial report? Okay, the next item, last item here is our minutes from our January 16th Board of Finance regular meeting. Does anyone have any comment?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I'll accept the motion to approve the minutes. Rob moves. Dan seconds. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Rob, that shoulder's going to work out.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Well, gonna try to go back to work tomorrow. We'll see how it works. Not
Let's
fun
see
being
if we got
righty,
the-
trying to toggle with the left-hand cursor, left-hand mouse, I should say. So we'll see.
What's the other guy look like, Rob?
Exactly.
So guys, the next item is special assignments. Rob, I was, and John, anything to report from our the audit meeting?
Go ahead.
John and I met with the audit team on Friday, had a good meeting, no outstanding issues, no outstanding findings. And Jen, I think I forgot to ask at the end, when are we going to bind and so we can send it around to the Board of Finance group?
It's available electronically, so I will email that out.
Yeah, can you send that to everybody so they can give it a look? But yeah, good
Yep.
report. Like I said, nothing major to report. Everything went really well. And John, any commentary you wanted to add?
Only that they were highly complimentary of the financial skills that we've got in the town, and considering the town next door's recent experience, I think we've got some people that we need to be very proud of.
Well put. Yeah, good job, Jen and Dave.
Thank you.
David, any new updates on HHR?
No, it's relatively quiet at the moment. We are in the process of finalizing plans for a construction oversight subcommittee and getting our heads wrapped around frequency of meetings, what gets discussed, how things work, exactly how things like change orders are going to work, during the process, how we're going to track them, and that kind of stuff. Jen and I, Jen, we'll have your cash flow for you soon. O&G has said that they will do that, and you and I will need to chat about the list of accounts if we can, to make sure that I get you what you're looking for. And other than that, we won't be having an HHR committee meeting till towards the end of March, when we will finalize all of the oversight information. And we will plan to hold informational meetings with the principals and PTOs of all the schools before the end of the school year, so that they're clear on what's going to, what the process will be, what's going to happen in the summer, what's going to happen next school year, all that good stuff.
So, David, is it fair to say we've signed the actual contract with our prime, and they've signed the contract with all the subs?
My understanding is we've signed the guaranteed maximum price contract with O&G, and then it's on O&G to execute the contracts with the subs, because the contract with the sub is actually between O&G and the sub, not O&G and not the sub and the town.
Got it. Paul, anything on pensions?
Oh, we just recently received the actuarial reports, I think within the last day or two. I haven't had an opportunity to look at them. I'll brief you at the next meeting.
Got it. I noticed during the budget discussion at the Board of Selectmen, two of the relatively large increases were our contributions to the town retirement funds and the OPEB accounts and so forth. So I think it'd be helpful to kind of have an update on that in connection with a little deeper dive on that in connection with the budget.
Okay.
Anyone else? Dan, Oxford?
No, as I said, we haven't met for a while, so nothing.
Okay, nothing really to add in the chairman's report. The agenda review, I shot around email on this. Jen suggested adding this so that we could have a discussion at the end of a meeting if there are any new things we want to either put on our next meeting or a subsequent meeting, in order to make sure we're beginning to address things that might require a little bit of work or preparation to get ready to discuss them. I think Paul had mentioned taking a deeper look at the amount of fund balance that we have, which is effectively at an all-time high. And I think that's certainly one thing. I think we typically do it in connection with the budget approval process, but I think, Jen, maybe if we could take a little deeper dive and around that, and maybe look at some of our historical draws on that fund, what they've been for, and other things, as we think about, how much of that we might want to use for capital or other uses.
Jim, if I could propose, the way that I've been thinking about this in my head is that we have a minimum floor amount that we seek to maintain. And we've had a practice, loose quotes practice, if you will, of looking at 15%. I think, the way I kind of think about it is we should look at picking a practice or an operational target level. And any amounts above that operational target level, we should look to utilize so that we can limit bonding in any current period.
So, David, that would be like effectively, rather than bonding for 100% of something, we could start to draw down amounts.
Yeah, let's just say for sake of argument that we chose the 15% number as the number we were going to target. What we would say is any amounts in excess of 15%, we would utilize towards capital in current period, so that we don't have to bond those items, given particularly some concerns that we've heard recently in terms of the aggregate level of indebtedness that the town has taken on over Great Island and the schools. So it basically sets it into a practice, if you will, as to how we're going to set the fund balance as opposed to loosely doing it every year.
Got it. And as we think about that, Jen, the total Board of Selectmen capital that they approved, a little over 4 million.
Yeah, it was about 4.3, I think, but it did assume 1 million of that would be bonded for the fire truck.
Got it. So in connection with, the Board of Ed has about $1.8 million. So net of the fire truck, we're a little over 5 million in terms of, let's just call it non-bondable, smaller capital projects. Which is higher than what I think what we've had in obviously in prior years. So, David, I mean, that's certainly one way that we could draw it down.
Yeah, and listen, I'm also with Jack on this issue, is we should make a priority, utilizing all of the ARPA funds to the extent that we can get them committed, and get that money spent first. If we have, more capital reserves that wait till next year to be spent on capital, that's fine, right? But we don't want to have to give the money back to the federal government.
I'm in favor of what David's suggesting, but with a caveat, which is I want to make sure that we're going through our standard budget review process and recommending deferring capital that we don't think needs to be spent this year, rather than approving the capital spent this year because we have another funding source other than taxes. So as long as the capital project meets our traditional threshold, at that point we can discuss how to fund it, right? Whether it's bonded,
100%.
whether it's taxes, whether it's general fund, but only if it meets that threshold.
100%.
Jim, one thought, and this has been around for years, it's just been moldering. But the last time Wayne Fox was at one of our meetings, he had suggested, if I remember correctly, that the town exert, if that's the word, eminent domain over the dam underneath the Rings End Bridge. That obviously requires that someone put up a deposit to pay for it. Can we at least bring that lease, which I think has terminated by now?
Yes.
Bring it up to date and figure out what is going to happen. The last time we talked with Ed, his comment was that FEMA was dragging its feet on the possible funding questions. Well, if in fact we don't own the land and the lease is expired, those who own the land probably ought to pay for whatever repairs are still necessary for the damage done during a recent storm a couple of years ago. So
I'll tell you what, I'll follow up with Ed on the status of the repairs, both permitting and costs. And I'll follow up with Wayne on the status of any progress they have made regarding owners or other thoughts on that. I know when we did look at the lease, it was determined that it was effectively a triple net lease. So the town was responsible for any maintenance and upkeep of the lease.
it was through the date of termination.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he had talked about
I'm not sure
if we continue on, if we effectively hold over under Connecticut law, we're still responsible for it. Like the lease just continues. But let me follow up with him on the legal side of that.
Okay, thank you.
It's a good point. Okay. Anything else on things for upcoming agendas? Okay, well, 2 weeks, March 5th, we're going to receive the budgets. We'll have a short presentation from Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed, and we'll probably have some discussion around those budgets after that. So I'll send around an updated schedule on our time, work with Jen on timing of which budgets we're going to review at on which of our meetings here shortly. Okay. I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
About minutes.
Okay, Rob moves, Dave seconds.
Minutes.
All those in favor?
Minutes.
We approved the minutes.
We
And we did.
approve them?
We approved the minutes, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, we voted on 'em.
Yeah. Jen, right? We approved those unanimously?
I'm
Yeah.
looking back at my notes and I
Yeah, we,
don't have
Yeah,
a
we-
note that says that we did.
We
yeah,
did.
I'm 100% sure we did.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have all those in favor of adjourning? Okay, we're adjourned. Everybody have a great night.
Thanks.
Thanks all. Thanks, Jack.